Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to put on our economic detective hats and completely master Chapter 2 of your textbook together. I know, trying to understand an entire country's economy can feel totally overwhelming. We're talking about millions of people doing millions of different things, from farming to coding. But hey, don't worry, we're going to break the whole thing down from the ground up. By the end of this session, you are going to have absolute conceptual mastery over the sectors of the Indian economy. So grab your notebooks, get comfortable, and let's crack this open.
Here's our game plan for today. We're going to cover 6 main things. First, the 3 economic sectors. Second, counting goods and GDP. Third, historical shifts. Fourth, the Indian employment paradox, which is super interesting. Fifth, working conditions. And finally, we'll wrap up by checking your understanding. Let's dive right in.
All right, part 1, the 3 economic sectors. This is our foundation.
So let's just look around us for a second. If you walk through any bustling market, you'll see a pretty chaotic world of work, right? To actually make sense of it all, economists classify these activities into 3 really simple buckets. Everything we do falls into one of these 3 areas. First up, the primary sector. This is where we produce goods by directly using natural resources, like agriculture, fishing, or forestry. Because it forms the absolute base for all other products, we call it primary. Simple enough, right? Next is the secondary sector. This covers activities where those natural products get changed into other forms through manufacturing. Think of it as the industrial sector. It's like taking cotton from a plant and spinning it into cloth in a massive factory. And finally, the tertiary sector. Now, what's genuinely fascinating about this sector is that it doesn't produce a physical good at all. Literally 0 physical products. Instead, it provides services that support the other 2 sectors. We're talking about transport, banking, doctors, and teachers. Let's actually map this out right now on our whiteboard using the Let's Work These Out exercise from your book. If we look at a flower cultivator or a beekeeper, well, they're working directly with nature, so they easily sit in the primary column. A basket weaver or a worker in a match factory, they're actively manufacturing a physical item, so they go straight to secondary. But look at the tertiary column. This is wild. Notice how incredibly diverse the service sector is. You've got a tailor providing a stitching service, a courier delivering packages, a call center employee, and yes, even an astronaut. They are all providing services, so they fall perfectly into the tertiary sector.
Okay, moving on to part 2, counting goods and GDP. And guys, there is a massive trap here, so pay close attention.
Here's the complication. We know what the sectors are, but how do we actually measure the size of the entire economy? With billions of cars, computers, nails, and coconuts being produced, you might think it's literally impossible. And honestly, you'd be right if you just tried to count the actual number of items. Instead, economists add up the value of these goods in rupees. But there is a huge trap here. Imagine this chain of production. Step 1, a farmer grows wheat and sells it to a flour mill for 20 rupees a kilo. Step 2, the mill grinds that wheat into flour and sells it to a biscuit company. Step 3, the bakery uses that flour, adds sugar and oil, and makes a final packet of biscuits to sell to consumers. Now, if the government just adds up the farmer's sale, plus the mill sale, plus the bakery sale, actually scratch that, that would be a complete disaster. We would be walking into a massive double counting trap. We'd be counting the exact same handful of wheat 3 separate times.
And this beautifully illustrates the golden rule of economics, guys. It makes sense only to include the final goods and services. Why? Because the value of final goods, like that packet of biscuits, already includes the value of all the intermediate goods that were used to make it. The price of the biscuits has the cost of the flour and the wheat baked right into it, pun intended. Counting intermediate goods separately would just inflate the numbers completely.
So the absolute crucial point is this. When you add up the value of all final goods and services produced in the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors during a particular year, you get the gross domestic product, or GDP. It's basically the ultimate scorecard showing just how big a country's economy really is. Now, quick side note for your conceptual mastery. Your textbook mentions that recently India has also started using gross value added, or GVA, to stay at par with global practices. GVA basically measures the sector's contributions after adjusting for things like taxes and subsidies. But whether we're talking about GDP or GVA, the core idea is exactly the same. We are measuring total final production.
All right, section 3, historical shifts in sectors, or how economies basically grow up.
So we know how to measure an economy, but economies aren't static, right? They breathe, they change, they evolve. How do economies normally transform over time as a country develops?
Well, if we look at the history of developed nations, they all tend to follow a very specific playbook. In their initial stages of development, the primary sector is the absolute king. Most goods are natural and most people work on farms. Then, over a long time, usually 100 years or more, new methods of manufacturing come in. Factories pop up everywhere and people shift from farms to these factories. The secondary sector becomes the heavy hitter for both production and employment. Finally, over the past century, developed countries experienced another massive shift, from factories to services. Today, in developed nations, the tertiary sector completely dominates both total production and jobs. From farms to factories to services, that's the standard, tried-and-true path to development.
Which brings us to part 4, the Indian employment paradox. Where are the jobs?
Here is where the plot twist drops for India. And you really need to pay attention to this because it defines the reality of our country today. Did India follow that exact same historical path? Let's look at the data. Check out this incredible explosion in production between 1977-78 and 2017-18. Look at that massive purple chunk right there representing the tertiary sector. Over 40 years, the service sector's production has just absolutely skyrocketed. It has completely replaced the primary sector as the largest producing sector in India. And it makes sense, right? As our country develops, we need basic services like hospitals and police stations, our agriculture and industry need more transport, and as incomes rise, people demand more services like eating out, tourism, and IT. So on the production side, yes, India is definitely following the developed world. But wait a minute, let's look at the employment side. Check out the massive blue bar representing agriculture in 2017-18. More than 40 years later, the primary sector remains the largest employer. While the service sector is out there producing the most wealth, the agricultural sector is still where the vast majority of workers are. Why on earth is that blue bar barely shrinking? Well, let's look at this comparison to really understand the paradox. Over a 40-year period, tertiary production grew by an astonishing 14 times. But tertiary employment, it only grew by 5 times. The exact same thing happened in the industrial sector. Production went up 9 times, but jobs only went up 3 times. This side-by-side comparison reveals the mystery of the missing jobs. Our service and industrial sectors are generating massive amounts of wealth and production, but they simply aren't creating enough jobs to pull people out of farming. As a result, more than half of our workers are stuck in agriculture, producing only a tiny fraction of the GDP. This naturally leads us into Section 5, Working Conditions and Ownership. Let's talk about the human element.
Because so many people are stuck without good, high-paying jobs in those booming factories and IT companies, we have to look at the economy from a completely different angle. We need to look past just the goods being made and look at how workers are actually treated and who owns the workplaces. When we talk about working conditions, we divide the economy into the organized and unorganized sectors. The organized sector is what you usually think of as a good job. Employment terms are fixed, people have assured work, formal rules, job security, and awesome benefits like paid leave and provident funds. But the harsh reality is, millions of people in the primary and tertiary sectors are trapped in the unorganized sector. This sector is made up of small, scattered units largely outside government control. There's no job security, no paid leave, no basic protections whatsoever. From street vendors to repair persons to landless agricultural laborers, these highly vulnerable workers desperately need protection and support.
And this human element brings us to our final way of categorizing the economy, by ownership. On one side, we have the private sector, owned by individuals or companies like Tata or Reliance. Their primary motive is straight up to earn a profit. On the other side, we have the public sector, where the government owns most of the assets. Their main aim isn't just to earn profits, but to provide basic essential services to citizens. And guys, this is exactly why the government has to step in. Private companies won't always find it profitable to build roads for remote villages or provide high-quality education and healthcare at a reasonable cost for the poorest citizens. The government has to take up these heavy responsibilities to ensure the whole nation develops fairly. All right, final section. Check your understanding. Let's lock this in.
We have covered some serious ground today, you guys. We've categorized the economy, navigated the GDP double counting trap, uncovered India's massive employment paradox, and analyzed the struggles of the unorganized sector. Now, let's test your mastery with some textbook exercises. First question. GDP is the total value of what produced during a particular year? Think back to our whiteboard example with the farmer, the flour mill, and the bakery. What do we count to avoid the trap?
If you said all final goods and services, you nailed it. We only count final goods because the value of the intermediate ones, like the wheat and the flour, are already baked into the price of those biscuits. Next question.
True or false, the activities in primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors are independent of each other. What do you think? Are these sectors operating completely on their own in little isolated bubbles? Absolutely false. They are highly interdependent. Remember the textbook example? If farmers refuse to sell sugarcane, which is the primary sector, the sugar mills in the secondary sector have to shut down entirely. And neither of them can function without the trucks and trains from the tertiary sector. They rely on each other completely. Okay, last question for you. In terms of GVA, gross value added, what is the share of the tertiary sector in 2017-18? Based on that massive purple bar we saw earlier, where the service sector completely took over, what's your best estimate for its dominance today? The answer is between 50 to 60%. The service sector seriously produces more than half of our entire economy's wealth. You guys have absolutely mastered these concepts today, and I am so pumped about how far we've come. But the real-world challenge remains, and this is the thought I want to leave you with. Our secondary and tertiary sectors are booming, producing incredible wealth. Yet, millions of people are still trapped in the unorganized primary sector. How do we build the bridges, the education, the skills, the policies, to shift our workforce into this booming 60% of the economy and finally solve India's employment paradox? Think about that as you look at the world around you. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.